That's terrible.
And good morning, folks, and welcome to what is the second of what might be an ongoing series of part of the mini courses that Nicole Gonzalez and her office with Ellis Bonds have established for February that have to do with Black History Month and MLK, our celebration. I'm Conrad Carnegie, and I teach criminal justice and sociology at Elizabethtown College. This course and this follow-up program today is part of my course, Criminal Justice System, the criminal justice system in the US. And one of the interesting things that happened when we met a couple of weeks ago with a different panel was that Nicole pointed out, as did Ellis, that we hadn't really addressed the connection, the linkage very clearly between the Black Lives Matter movement and the Defund the Police movement, and how those two were connected and how they've been connected historically. And so we agreed to come back for a second event today, but I've had a number of conversations with students who have also indicated that they are interested in perhaps putting a student panel together. I've had students actually from another university contact me as well, and so we're thinking about doing that also. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay, great. I am just thrilled with the panel that we have today, and I want to say thank you to all of them. There are other folks who I'd like to bring in, and again, I'm hoping that we can continue to do this because we've had such a good response, positive response. But I'm just delighted with the panel and thank them particularly today for some of them, they've got children at home today because of school cancellations, and I just appreciate that they're willing to continue with this panel and this program today in spite of some inconvenience perhaps to them. So thank you so much. I've entitled this Black Lives Matter, Defund the Police and Refund the Community with a question mark. Because the question has to do with how do we do these things, or how do we work at these things together in a community. And all of our guests are from Lancaster. And so this is a close to home kind of challenge, struggle that we're up to. And so I'm grateful for the guests we have. Kevin Ressler is the CEO and president of United Way in Lancaster, formerly the director of Meals on Wheels in Lancaster. And Kevin grew up in Lancaster County as a Master's of Divinity and has spent his life speaking or in seeking ways to bring about equitable peace and justice for all. He's serving now, we spoke last week, on a lot of different boards, and he is an accomplished public speaker, writer, and actor. He, as I said, is president and CEO of United Way, the proud husband to Melissa, and father of Acacia and Irene. Kevin, you tell us.
Yeah, Acacia,
Okay.
and Iriana. So
Thank you.
the acacia tree is a common tree in Africa. When you see those savanna pictures with the lopsided tree. My mother's from Tanzania, East Africa. My my grandfather was the first Mennonite bishop to take over from the missionaries in all of Africa, and also the first Mennonite pastor in Tanzania. And so he was 5 years old. He was goat herding, and with his brothers, and some Seventh-day Adventist missionaries came, and he heard this story of Jesus and connected it to a religion called a pre-axial religion, is sort of before modern religious practices, right? So his indigenous religious practice, the family wasn't terribly religious, but had a sense of circular in the world. And so this idea of resurrection in Christ and living again made sense with the understanding of his community on the continuous existence within life that happens, cycles, death, birth, plants, regeneration, all that stuff. So anyway, in order to honor him, one of the reasons we named Acacia was he was sitting under an acacia tree when that happened. And so we named her Acacia. And Iriana was born in 2017. You can think about what was going on in the world in 2017. And Iriana is a Greek word for peace. It's a Greek name for peace, I should say. So that's how we named our children.
Kevin, what a wonderful background and context. Thank you. As you hear, we're in for a treat today with Kevin. We've got a couple of other guests as well, several others I'm delighted to have with us. Marquis Lupton is a Lancaster native, a graduate of Lancaster Catholic High School, has worked a lot in news reporting and for news corporations. He is serving on the board of directors of the Philadelphia Broadcasting Company, or has served. He is running his podcast company, TCP Network, and a nonprofit Positive Media Academy in Lancaster. And Marquis, welcome. We're delighted to have you with us as well.
Hello, everybody. Good morning. Glad to be here.
Thank you, Marquis. We're looking forward to hearing from you. Jessica Mysterio was with us in the past panel and is back. Jessica is a single mother of 3 sons and a daughter living in Lancaster. She's gained recognition as a community leader. She's been in prison twice over the past year for taking part in the peaceful local protests. She will share with us also her experience in some of these challenges and fights and questions. Ellis Bonds is a colleague of mine, is a native of Atlantic City, New Jersey, where he was born and raised. He received his Bachelor of Arts in Liberal Arts, Concentration Social Studies, Sciences, and minor in Africana Studies from Stockton University, Master's in Higher Ed from Florida International University. And he is active in the NAACP and is passionate about activism, racial equality, and human rights, and works in our Diversity and Title IX office. Welcome, Ellis, as well. And welcome, Mysteria. I'm sorry, I'm not sure if she's on or not. Are you here, Mysteria? Okay, she'll probably be joining us. Again, I just want to thank you all for being part of this panel. This is delightful that we can host this. We've done some advertising of it, but this one, along with this panel, along with the other panel earlier, which I'm still trying to get some help from Brian, who's offered to help me helm in our ITS office to edit, and then we'll get that on. I'm going to turn it over to Kevin and just say, Kevin, thank you again for being with us. And I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say. Welcome.
Thank you. Do I have the ability to share screen? Can you give me the ability to share screen?
I sure can.
And can everybody hear me? Let me check my mic volume.
Yes.
Okay, great. So thank you for your time this morning. Thank you for the invitation, and thank those of you who are interested in these, and all issues and ideas around justice and equity. We've not always had a society that cared about justice and equity in many cases at all. Or we wrote people out of consideration so that we could say that we cared about justice and equity. As a holder of a Master's of Divinity and as I often say, sometimes pastor in the Mennonite Church, I'm very cogently aware of the ways in which historically we have adjusted who counts, right? This debate around all lives matter versus Black Lives Matter. The big missing link for many people is the reality that in America, the word all has rarely ever meant all, including today. And so when you insist on saying, oh, I mean all, I insist on saying, I cannot believe you because the evidence does not show historically that the word all in America means everyone. And not just blacks and whites, right? In America, when those words were written about all people being equal, it meant all white land-owning men, not even all white men, for goodness sakes. And so to believe that we can all of a sudden, without having substantive, systemic, and tangible change, all of a sudden pretend that the words that we wrote hundreds of years ago meant something that they didn't, is dishonest and it's destructive. So in order for us to get to a place where we can actually believe that people care about one another, care about where we're going as a society in an equitable and mutual way, not a mutually exclusive way and not an exclusively exclusive way, then what we need to be able to see is the willingness to admit and unwind systems of oppression that exist. And so I'm going to do a couple of things here this morning, and I'm going to borrow from a previous presentation I did first, and then I have one set up specifically about defunding police. But I'm going to borrow the first one. I'm going to hop around. So I'm going to hop around a little because I'm not going to go with all the slides. But for a presentation, I was sort of trying to link some MLK's history into the history that we have today with Black Lives Matter, and connecting those things. Then I'm going to talk about the Lancaster City budget with regards to policing and community. And so before I get into that, just a couple of historical notes that are important for us to understand. First of all, the history of policing in America. For the early part of American history, you had structures of essentially sheriffs. In fact, in Lancaster County today, we still have a sheriff, and we have this system of sheriffs. And our present sheriff, Chris Lepler, has been very clear that he will not respect some of the government's mandates on whether it's masks or it's other public health mandates. And so he identifies in his post that he is the highest law enforcement officer or agency. And on a historical level, partially true. But we also have what most of us are more familiar with, which is the departmental process of policing. So you've got a police department, you have a DA, and so you'll often hear this phrase, the DA is the highest law enforcement officer in whatever community, which brings its own questions about who polices the police if the police police themselves, right? It's a bit of an aside, but so if we look at that there's these two divergent histories, what we're actually being told is that there are multiple systems historically of policing in America. The sheriff system was essentially, and you see this in like old Westerns, right? Someone makes someone a deputy, and now all of a sudden they're an officer of the law and they can, arrest people, kill people, whatever the case may be. So that's in the sheriff deputizing system. The other one is a permanent department. The permanent department system is the one that we're mostly talking about when we talk about issues of policing. The permanent department system, there's multiple ways that it came to be. The first official department is in Boston in 1838, partly has to do with rise in population density and crime. But most of the departments, particularly around the Mason-Dixon line, are founded as a result of slaves fleeing for their freedom, and laws that were made to allow the capture and return of those, and to make it illegal for people to harbor people who were fleeing, so that the departments were founded to create a permanent establishment of jurisdiction. And here's a really important part for you to understand about policing throughout the entire history of America, regardless of if it's the sheriff system or if it's the department system or parts in between. And that is that law enforcement in America has had a primary focus in its entire history, and that is to protect the property of those who have wealth. Whether that was land-owning white men in the early part of this country who believed falsely that you can own a human being as if they were some form of livestock, that was seen as property, and it was to be returned to those who supposedly owned it. And so we have to understand that when we are talking about the reason these systems exist, they are not about public safety. They are not about protecting the community good. They are not Andy Griffith and Mayberry. Those are narratives and myths and stories that we tell about what policing is and what it should be, but that is not what it is designed to do. It is designed to protect property for the wealthy in our community. And as property has shifted, that has also shifted things from, for instance, one of the ways in which we capture people and keep them suppressed today is that we now call ideas property, intellectual property. We allow copyright and other things to be the domain of the wealthy owner class, suppressing those who are often the creators and the innovators from being able to move from one class to another. So I just wanted you all to understand that's an important part, a really deeply important part, when we talk about why there's a need for Black Lives Matter and reform and all of these movements. I also want to really quickly just mention a point in history. In the early part of late 1800s, early 1900s, lynchings. It is important to understand, and I'm not going to show you any pictures of lynchings, but there's a really important picture of a lynching for a man named Jesse Washington, who was burned and hung on a post, and is the reason that the NAACP hung a flag outside of their offices that said a man was lynched today. The flag was from funds raised in response to Jesse Washington's heinous, immoral, and unethical murder. But there's the picture of Jesse Washington, and what you see in the background of that picture is a bunch of white men, and it's only white men in that picture, who are standing around as if this is normal. As if this is normal. Burning a person at all is never normal, no matter what they did. With the exception of a cremation, nobody should ever be burned. And so if you look at the lynchings, what's really important to know is the passive way in which society accepted this, both by not talking about it, not attending it, but also by attending it as a picnic. People showed up to lynchings by the hundreds and thousands, and they sat on hills with their children and ate sandwiches as if this was normal, as if this was justice. And it was done by rabble-rousing groups of individuals in the community while the police chiefs would sit and watch and arrest no one for a public murder. This is part of the history of the police departments in America. Because the people who were being burned weren't seen as people, they were seen as property that was malfunctioning. So when we think about today and what people say and don't do with regards to what we see as clear evidence of state-sanctioned lynchings in rogue police departments, this is not to say that every police officer or person who puts on the uniform is an evil person. This is not, do not conflate any of that with the attempts of smearing a pursuit of justice that is going on. But when people are being murdered in cold blood, shot in their back, unarmed, having evidence put upon them, and we do not see our society demanding they be arrested, then we are complicit like those who sat on hills, picnicking with their children while people were burned on poles, oftentimes for no crime ever committed, beyond offending the sick sympathies of white men protecting their power. So we get to the civil rights movement, which we know a lot about in certain ways. We aren't always told the full truth of things, right? And so we often misremember MLK. And I'm going to pull just a couple of slides here. We intentionally misremember MLK. We also intentionally misremember Malcolm X. We're not going to talk about Malcolm today, but Brother Malcolm is fascinating for a lot of reasons. I would highly recommend listening to one of the greatest political speeches in American history, and that is Malcolm X's The Ballot or the Bullet speech. I'm not going to go into it, but also make sure that you, at some point in your life, read Martin Luther King's letter from Birmingham jail. This is the preceding letter from 8 white faith community leaders, not just Christians. There was also a rabbi involved here. But these leaders, white leaders, clergymen, wrote a letter to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. an appeal for law and order and common sense is what they were saying. And they were saying, wait, go through the law, go through the courts, go through the system. Justice will come, surely. No indication of the fact that a mere 100 years prior, the man wasn't considered a human being by the law. But surely the law, rely on the law. Don't come into the streets. Yeah, they also point out that it's very important for them that he's an outside agitator. That Martin Luther King is not from our community. Let us deal with this in our way. Martin Luther King Jr. decides to respond to that short letter with this letter. Sometimes some people need more than a few words to get the point. And so Brother Martin went ahead and appealed to them in language and with context that they should have understood. He references T.S. Eliot. He speaks of scripture and speaks of community and faith. And I will read this part, which is one of my favorite parts. Never before have I written a letter this long, or should I say a book. I'm afraid that it is much too long to take your precious time. I can assure you that it would have been much shorter if I had been writing from a comfortable desk. But what else is there to do when you are alone for days in the dull monotony of a narrow jail cell, other than write long letters, think strange thoughts, and pray long prayers? Making the point. He also this is the letter where his famous quote, threat to justice anywhere, justice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And that is the response of saying, hey, some bad stuff's going down in your town. I have a right to be there for those for whom it is happening. My jurisdiction is driven by, in his case, his faith. So sorry, that's the Jesse Washington picture. We're gonna skip that. This is the man was lynched today. And this flag was flown from the NAACP's headquarters from 1920 to 1938 to mark the lynchings of Black people in the United States. The flag was purchased using money raised after the lynching of Jesse Washington in 1916 and was stopped from flying after the NAACP's landlord threatened them with eviction if they continued to fly that flag. At one point, the leader of the NAACP said, we will stop flying the flag the day it isn't true, because lynchings were happening that frequently. And this is the America, friends. This is the America that we try to forget, that we pretend in some cases never happened. On the left, you see this is 1939. On the right, Dr. Samuel Green, a learned individual, grand wizard. David Duke in 1977. Reminds us of the driving by in the 1939 picture, swinging a noose outside the window. David Duke on the right, a mere 12 years later, having won elected office as a former KKK Grand Wizard in Louisiana. He had not repented. He did not say he had any different views. Hate was on the ballot, and hate won. Elections do not confer the most moral or just individual as the victor of the political prize. In Lancaster, on the left in 2013, I was part of the organizing group for the first Black Lives Matter movement in Lancaster. After we began our conversations after Trayvon Martin was killed, we also started looking more and more and growing more and more at the time after Brother Michael Brown was murdered in the streets, left there, and his body left in the heat to burn, like as if a person put on fire on a pole. These illusions are not lost on those of us who pay attention. These connections are as fresh today as 100 years ago. And so in 2013, we had a die-in, recognizing the every minute for which Michael Brown was left outside, we marked a second and laid there for almost 5 minutes on the ground. In the newspaper, the comment section had many individuals who said things like, I'm going to wear my golf spikes and walk all over them, or wear my cleats if they want to lay on the ground. We shut nothing down and disrupted no one, intentionally laying as a visual image and not a disruptive one. And still the discomfort of that truth for people wanted them to respond with violence to nonviolence. On the right, just wanted to connect, this was a movement for refugees. That march around immigration doesn't happen here in Lancaster without the building blocks on Black justice. And this is a long historical train. The fight and the strategies that Black folks have used to demand justice have been employed across the world and for other issues. And too often we forget the precipitating point of injustice, and we move on and solve other problems and forget that we still haven't solved the originating sin in this nation. Just to point it out, in 2017, KKK plans rally with cross burning in Lancaster County. This is not only things that happened in 1916 that we are responding to. These are things that are still happening today. That was the response. I don't have a wide shot, hundreds of people outside the courthouse, but we march, and I'm going to skip this. There's a great Showtime documentary with LeBron James. This was the March for Our Lives, again, showing that these movements are not disconnected. And it is nearly impossible to look at these images and not notice the prominence of Blue Lives Matters flags. As a Christian and as a Christian leader, it is disturbing to me the amount of Christian imagery that was there on January 6th. It is a thing that those of us of faith must root out, or else we cannot call ourselves serious people of God, period. Just wanted to show you these real quick. So these are some historical, we often hear this, the sense that why can't Black Lives Matter be peaceful? They're burning down cities and all these things. These are some historical cartoons. The one on the far left is 1968. I think it's what's called the new politics. And if you see right there in the front one, it says, if we don't have our way, it's all rigged, right? These are not new conversations that we are having today. They are recycled conversations. In the middle, it says, you can't read it, but it says, I don't understand it. Why can't they behave as if they had good education, good housing, and good jobs in 1967? Right? Well, because they don't. Because these things have not been granted to them as a people, intentionally and systemically. These things have not been granted. And so why can't they act like they haven't been systemically suppressed for hundreds of years? I don't know, because they've been systemically suppressed for hundreds of years. The hill to climb for people of color has always been higher than the hill to climb for white communities. My father, who's white, very clearly said this to me and my brothers early in our life. And he said, this is not fair and this is not right, but you will have to work harder. Your mistakes will be judged twice as hard as anything I've ever had to do. It's not a fun conversation to have with your son, I'm sure. It wasn't a fun one to have with my dad and asking him why. That doesn't make sense. And on the far right, what you have there, if you can't read them, you've got NAACP, CORE, SNCC, SCLC. These are nonviolent groups during the 60s, and they are playing "We Shall Overcome," that famous hymn, and it says, "Race riots, Harlem and Brooklyn, Brother Nero, do you smell smoke?" indicating the end of America. This is from a different perspective, and a meme from last year. Never burned one building, never robbed one store, never destroyed one town, changed the world. On the right is a political cartoon that was among King's papers when he died. It had been cut out and mailed to him with the following words: "How can you, a minister of the gospel of Jesus Christ, be such a deceitful hypocrite? You're not fooling anyone but yourself. You're," and then there's an illegible word, "nauseating talk about nonviolence. You demand a program to overcome poverty and something untold amounts, something high living all over the globe to feed your egotism." And if you can see, the cartoon says, it's a quote, it's as if Martin Luther King is speaking. It says, "I plan to lead another nonviolent march tomorrow." And in the background, it's showing that there's all sorts of burning and other things. They pretend that the way that they treated the man was not the way that they treated a man. Right? So We're gonna hop over. Actually, I did need to show you. One more slide on that one. So, yeah. So I had written recently a post that talked about the concerns around the week that James Blake was those who shot him and those who were part of that did not get charged with anything. It was the same week as January 6th. And had an individual send a message to me saying, "Hey, Kevin, be prepared for the backlash against United Way of Lancaster County for your racial views. There are thousands of people who contribute to your charity that do not agree with what you're saying. Actions have reactions. People can decide individually or corporately not to contribute." The thing is, right, that we that comments that I made, the comments that I made had nothing to do with racial views. I simply pointed out that accountability is not held the same in this country. What was fascinating, of course, to me too, is that, and this is not the first time I've had this. I've had threats and death threats and all these fun things because that's what happens. But my favorite part, if you didn't get to the bottom of that, was, oh, and I couldn't help notice because I checked our database, you're not a United Way donor. You threatened me as if you are part of a group of people for whom do not exist. In your isolation, you think that your hatred is universal, but it is not. And so we hope that the world is rapidly changing. We know that it probably isn't changing as rapidly as we would like, but we hope that it is working towards rapid change. So I'm going to switch gears here a little bit and talk specifically now about modern policing. And specifically, I'm going to use Lancaster City Police Department for the next part, and what I'm going to show. And I'm not doing that because I think Lancaster City Police Department is uniquely bad or even unique particularly at all. In fact, that's kind of the opposite. I feel that you can pull most police departments in America and you will find a similar story as what I'm going to now show you. I'm going to show it to you through numbers, meaning I'm going to look at their budget a little bit here. So let's see here. Okay. Defund the police, right? Is this inherently equal to refund the community? Is this common at all? So the first thing I want to mention about policing in Lancaster is that in 2016, a union contract was negotiated that allows the police to live in any county adjacent to Lancaster County, which means you can basically live almost in Baltimore or Philadelphia and be a Lancaster City police officer. That was changed from what had previously been you had to live in Lancaster County. And that was changed in the 60s to you had to be a city resident to be a police officer. This is more common than it used to be. And the excuse you always see is good candidates sometimes live within commuting distance, but outside the current limit. It's understandable that they might not want to move, especially if they have school-age children, Hickey said. And we have heard this again and again from the city's department, largely Bill Hickey, who's in charge of recruitment. We can't get anybody closer than that. This is a county of 550,000 people. There are over 400,000 over 18-year-old adults in this county. Don't tell me you cannot find 193 people to live in this county. That's absolutely ridiculous. And if that is the case, right, then instead of changing the entire world of requirements, so if I as president CEO of an organization went to my board and said, I can't hire anybody, there's nobody who can do the work, right? Where's accountability going to fall? Are we going to change our organizational mission and our way of being? Or am I going to lose my job because I can't do my job well, right? If you can't recruit people, maybe the problem isn't everything but you. Maybe the problem is you, right? But we've changed all of the entire guidance for this belief that we can't find people. Maybe the culture doesn't welcome people, doesn't invite people in. Now I'm going to go through this relatively fast, but what I'm going through here is the staffing budget for police in Lancaster City. Okay. So the police chief is about 145. It's not on this page. We have 3 captains making over $130,000. The police lieutenants all make over $100,000. The detectives make $92,000. Now, I'm not saying that people shouldn't be paid well by any means, but we're going to just keep going here. The sergeants, we're back to over 100, right? There's a lot of people making a good amount of money, and police officers who are doing their job well and effectively should be compensated for what they're doing. Here we've got beat officers in the 80,000s, 80,000, 70,000, all the way down to the lowest paid police officer in Lancaster City is budgeted to make $55,735. Okay. It's 193 police officers. So you got 193 people making over $55,000 a year. Police or patrol service aides making $45,300 minimum. School crossing guards, that's not a full-time job, but it should be pointed out that all of a sudden we flip from salary to hourly. The people who are most involved in the community, who are most likely to know the names of children and family members and whose names are most likely to be known, get paid $12, $15 an hour. And so $15 million. Now compare that to the director of neighborhood engagement who makes $85,000. We look at the entire budget. What we find here is that police is $27 million on a $64 million budget, half of the budget is going. And here's the important part of why I'm even talking about their salaries, because I'm not trying to go at people's salaries, but I want to point out, right, that they don't have to live in the county. They work in the city, and the city's household median income is $42,000 a year. If you mandate that the police live in the city, you immediately bump up the median income significantly in your community. Not only do you bump up the median income, but now you have people whose dollars are spent in your local community, just from the point of economic development. And I'm going to use the term refunding the police, rethinking the police, just from an economic development standpoint. Now you've got people owning homes they're renting them out and they live locally. So you've begun to approach the slumlord challenges. You've got people who know the community, are known in the community. You have people who care about the repercussions of decisions that they might make. This just shows that the last contract, because the article I showed you was through 2019, the last union contract did not make any changes to where someone can live and did give a shift differential increase. Budgets are the easiest way of perceiving institutional values and priorities. The average social worker salary in Lancaster is $63,000. Typical range between 57 and 70. Brother Ricardo Munoz was murdered by a police officer, and I use that term understanding that that was not the legal definition because the individual was exonerated, but his life was taken without committing a commensurate crime. There was no capital crime committed. And so he was murdered coming out of his house with a knife. In 2019, across the entire United States, all territories, and Puerto Rico, there were approximately 80 police officers killed in the line of duty, about 40 of them during a felonious interaction. 0 of them were killed by a knife. The prior year, 0 were killed by a knife. If you look at news reports, though, you see again and again police officers who are exonerated, who are told that they were using violence, shooting and killing an individual justifiably because they had a knife and there was an imminent threat. But if there's no evidence that any officers are ever killed by a knife, what is the imminent threat? How can we send caseworkers, social workers into these environments with nothing but a clipboard and they come out fine, but we send police officers in with weapons and someone comes out dead? It is not a theoretical. It would cost us less money to do it. We have cut school funding. We have cut social work funding. We have cut everything away, and we keep increasing policing budgets. We are cutting the foundations of what it makes to have stable society. We are doing now what the World Bank and the IMF does to developing countries to intentionally keep them substrate within the global economic system. We are removing funding for education, for health, and for all of the things that develop a well-run and well-ordered society. And we're responding in the way that we have responded internationally, by militarizing our police and expecting a different result than the one that we plan and design for other countries. Now, I'm going to really quickly show you one last thing, and I'm going to stop because I'm about at my time here. I just want us to really quickly take a look. I talked about values as a budget. The other way to see someone's values is to listen to how they themselves talk about themselves, right? So if we hop over here, I'm going to close out of city budgets. Those are fun things. Good evening reading if you're ever bored. So if we go to the City of Lancaster's police website, just want us to see what they value. First thing there, Crime Watch, right? There's a recruitment video. Let's look at what they say about their community relations. Oh, okay. So they have a couple of links, no commentary, a couple of links. They have the city link, the Office of Promotion, which is events. They have their foundation for raising money for them. The Safety Coalition, which is an independent organization with all the cameras. City Alliance, which is a business development organization. The school district. Oh, okay. Police Athletic League. That seems like they must be doing that. Let's hop over to the PAL website. And okay, started in September 2014, Police Athletic League. Okay, let's check out their blog, since this is the only thing that they had on their site contributing to community. Oh, the last post is in 2017. Huh, that doesn't seem like it's a high priority now, does it? Now, I'm gonna play this video for you here in a second. I'm gonna skip some of those, but I do wanna go back here real quick. Crime prevention, right? So here again, their prevention references the Police Athletic League. So that's their means of crime prevention from a community development level. That's concerning. Their own news, communication with the community. Last time they put on their news site, 2014, right? These things are concerning, but they clearly did spend some money on a video. And so let's give them the benefit of the doubt here, and we'll watch their recruitment video. I think I need, let's see, share sound. There we go. All right.
Honor, community, public service. If these words mean something to you, then you should join the Lancaster City Police. Our mission is to provide outstanding service with professionalism and integrity. Through numerous outreach programs and campaigns, our officers stay heavily involved in the community. They can also enjoy a great work-life balance in one of the fastest-growing entertainment and art scenes in the country. We offer competitive salaries, pension plans, and excellent benefits. Join the Lancaster Police. Go to policeapp.com/LancasterCops to apply. Honor.
Now I'm going to play this again, and I'm going to narrate real quick a couple of thoughts. First thing that they show you is an image of equipment, weaponry specifically. The word honor.
Community.
Community, they say, while throwing on a flak jacket.
Public service. If these
Public service, they say, while having on more of an equipment gear and in a car.
words mean something to you, then you should join the Lancaster City Police. Our mission is to provide outstanding service.
This is the first moment that you see interaction, a third of the way video, interaction between an officer and the community, but the community is edited out of the visual so that you're only seeing the officer.
Service with professionalism and integrity. Through
I will point out that the integrity was a DA press conference, which means that they were probably talking about arresting someone. And the police chief, who was dismissed under mysterious circumstances, but did not seem to be positive ones. And one of those, it seems to be, was not on board with issues of progressive policing and racial justice work.
Numerous outreach programs and campaigns, our officers stay heavily involved in the community. They can also enjoy a great work-life balance in one of the fastest-growing entertainment and art scenes in the country. We offer competitive salaries, pension plans, and excellent benefits.
Excellent benefits includes that you get to send a canine dog at someone in a car. These are things that when you are discussing, and Marquise knows this as well as I do, both of us have done video production, you have conversations with people about what messages you want to send. This is the message they want to send. Very little interaction with community, that you get a lot of fun toys and weapons, and that this is what we see as community relations, is putting on a flak jacket. That your interaction with the community is putting on a flak jacket. So with that, I would like to stop and say thank you. I want to be clear about a couple of things. When we talk about defunding the police versus refunding the community, I run a 2-on-1 call center within my job, or oversee the people who run it, which I'm working with Senator Bob Casey on legislation that would significantly increase funding there. I'm not on a recording advocating that we need to dismantle every single police force in America, but I do want to suggest that at the bare minimum, when we talk about this, we should think simultaneously. If we're talking about defunding the police, we're not just being retributive, we're trying to attack. We're thinking about how do we get something better, right? So if you went to a restaurant and you ordered a piece of chicken and the chicken came out raw, right? And you said, this is not what I ordered. I would like a refund, right? You told me you were going to give me something that I didn't get, right? I demand a refund. No one would question you. If we have significantly increased police funding over and over and over again, and we've seen an increase in crime, I think that the community is owed a reevaluation of what we were supposed to be getting for what we have paid for. And particularly communities like Lancaster City, where I am paying outsiders to patrol my neighborhood, to take my money out and to put it in their houses so that their property taxes go up in a state that funds its education system on property values. You are repeatedly creating a system that is defunding me today and defunding me and destabilizing me tomorrow without reinvesting in my community. That structure needs to be changed. And if it isn't changed, in the state of Pennsylvania, any municipality without a police force has the state troopers have to market it and cover it. So if the union contract insists and continues to insist in unfair negotiations, there are other ways of having public safety and a stronger negotiating perspective from our elected officials. Our elected officials cannot be left off the hook. The union contracts are the source of the problem, but they don't sign both lines. Our elected officials do. Thank you.
Kevin, thank you. Let's give him a hand. I told you you were in for a treat. Kevin, you are both passionate and very direct and clear with your facts and data. Thank you for being with us. It's been a privilege. I saw lots of heads nodding. Thank you. I want to introduce Marquis Lupton. Marquis, it's really a delight to have you with us as well. Marquis is a Lancaster native, born and raised here, a 2002 graduate of Lancaster Catholic High School. He spent his early part of his youth attending E.R. Martin and Wheatland Middle School. Lancaster has helped shape Marquis into the husband and father of 2 daughters he is today. After receiving his Bachelor's of Arts in Communications from Shippensburg University, Marquis began his broadcasting career at WLAN, as well as rejuvenating the Lancaster County Young Dems. He rallied 300 to catch 5 charter buses down to Obama's first inauguration. Marquis enrolled in Morgan State's master's program for media to pursue a career in television. Upon graduating from Morgan State with his master's, he worked at CNN for the Pentagon unit, where he sat in on defense briefings daily with military personnel. And he also has a lot of other experience in other networks as well. Marquis has worked in the district office of Philadelphia State Rep. Brendan Boyle, served on the board of directors for Philadelphia Public Broadcasting, and as I said earlier, is currently running his podcast company, TCP Network, his nonprofit Positive Media Academy in Lancaster, PA. Marquis, thank you for being with us. And you are invited to respond or to share your own, whatever's on your heart today. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you for being our guest.
All right, awesome, wonderful, wonderful. Kevin, That was amazing, brother. That was absolutely amazing. Made some notes that I actually want to piggyback off of. And I saw a lot of like carryover, a lot of layover, especially when we're talking about the media industry. As you heard, I am a former news reporter, former news anchor. I did just about anything in the news business, videography, floor director, producer. I worked for CNN, CBS The Early Show, CNN, CBS The Early Show, ABC, NBC, and CBS stations. A lot of the times, especially during my time as a news reporter, there was a close relationship, a uncomfortably close relationship, I would say, with the local police department and the news industry, the news agency, especially during my time when I was in Atlantic City. There was a uncomfortable a relationship with the Atlantic City Police Department and the police departments in the counties, to the point that they would come to the news station, chill out, hang out, have some coffee, have lunch, and it was again a uncomfortable relationship, because these are the people that we're supposed to be holding accountable. These are one of the systematic entities in our society, in our communities, that us as a news industry must be independent from and hold accountable. And a lot of times there was just this uncomfortable camaraderie, to the point that as news reporters we had to have there was this person inside each police department. They were a PIO, a public information officer. And their whole job was to be the front-facing person for the news. And whatever details they got, we weren't allowed to talk to the chief. We weren't allowed to talk to any lieutenants. We weren't allowed to talk to any beat cops. We could only talk to this one person. And this one person was trained in media. So they're savvy with their words and so forth. So with this uncomfortable relationship, because of the workload that we had as news reporters, because we had to cover 6 to 7 news stories a day, that affected our workload. We couldn't do like back in the 90s and the 80s and the 70s, where those traditional news reporters, they would have 1, maybe 2 stories a day to work on, and they can work that story. They can chase their leads. They can knock on doors, they can talk to neighbors, that traditional news reporting type thing. Versus nowadays, news reporters are tasked with covering 7 to 8 stories a day. So just having that workload, 9 times out of 10, a lot of them just depend on calling the public information officer, getting a press release from the police department. And then now that's the entire story. And the only thing they do is take out the police jargon to make it sound like they wrote the story. So then again, you see this uncomfortable relationship between the community, the news station, and the police department. And in some instances, the police department becomes the news station. Because again, they're sending the press releases. The public information officer is commenting. And then on top of news heavy reliance on if it bleeds, it leads. That's one of the things that they teach us in our journalism 101 classes. If it bleeds, it leads, which means that the most egregious, the most outrageous, insane stories, they get the most coverage, they get the most news. They're right on top of the newscast. That's why when you turn on your 5 o'clock news, the first 5 minutes before you see weather, you just realize that the world is on fire. And that's intentional. Again, because of the news model, if it bleeds, it leads. So during my time in New Jersey, again, if it bleeds, it leads. I was there for Sandy. And there were a lot of great human interest stories that were coming out about people banding together and helping each other during and after Hurricane Sandy. And the only thing that the news departments wanted us to put out was the negative, people looting, people stealing. And the police department really went into overdrive with sending us stories and then making suggestions. You guys should cover this, you guys should cover this. And again, I seen that uncomfortable, partnership relationship between the local PD and our local television station. So we see and began to see, especially during that time of Hurricane Sandy, how the Atlantic City Police Department really became one of the driving forces of our narrative, of us telling our 5 o'clock, 5:30, and 6 o'clock news. And in essence, if you looked at it, the police control the narrative. So any kind of crime that happened, any kind of police shooting, any kind of police involved incident, it may seem to the broader public that we're giving both sides of the story, but we got the information from the police, we got the tip from the police, the sound bites that we got, they were picked by the police, and the people that we interviewed, the community members that we interviewed, they were in the vicinity. So they may not even have any involvement in the actual story. They were just there, just giving us an opinion to show that, oh, this story isn't biased. So Kevin, to your point, I heard a lot of a lot of carryover, a lot of piggybacking, I'll say, on relationships, and it just really tinged me to really revisit Atlantic City and the stories that I wanted to cover. For example, one of a post-Hurricane Sandy story, the casinos, the Revel Casino, to be exact, they were issuing eviction notices to the neighborhoods that surrounded their casino. Their point was that the casino would then buy the abandoned property and expand their casino. Obviously, they didn't own the property. Obviously, the eviction notices were illegal. I covered that story and actually wanted to do a follow-up story on the inactivity of the local PD, because this is highly illegal to send out false documents saying that you have to vacate your property. That's illegal. When I wanted to get the police involved and do the story with the police, there was pushback. There was, well, it's technically illegal, but we wouldn't know who to start with. And my thing was, well, don't police investigate? I mean, we get paid to investigate, so let's work our way up the ladder. And there was this pushback as, oh, well, this is a non-story. This is a non-issue, which then pointed to, again, the police controlling the narrative and that close relationship between the local PD and the local news station, which is one of the reasons why I started the TCP network. On top of just people of color being disproportionately covered in a negative way, I wanted to create something that was independent of our police department. Not saying that it's all bad, because there certainly were more than enough instances where I actually had to call the local PD to get some good factual information. So it's not all bad. It's just that there's a concern when an entity as strong as a police department, an entity as influential as a police union, also has power and influence over your local television station. Because then, like with Mr. Munoz, with something like that happening, now the police control that narrative. With that police involved shooting, our local stations, they're getting second, third-hand information. Not to toot our own horn for TCP network, but once that happened, we were on scene within 3 minutes. And we were getting the actual story. We were getting the actual narrative. Because we're internet-based, we're not bound by the same rules and regulations that our traditional and terrestrial TV stations are bound to by the FCC and FCC regulations. So during the summertime, when there were the protests, we were able to be at ground zero, so to speak, and speak to the people without any worry that, oh, we're going to offend the police, oh, we're going to offend a potential sponsor, or we're going to offend a public official that has a show on the network. You know, TCP, we're not bound by that tether. We're not tethered that way. So we're able to tell certain stories without the spin, without the worry of pushback. And that's one of, there's not too many downsides of local news, but that is the one major downside of local news, is that constant relationship, and also that heavy reliance, especially for your smaller stations. When I first started out in ABC in Salisbury, Maryland, there was a heavy reliance on police. We would call the 3 police departments. We would call the police department in Fruitville, Maryland. We would call the police department in Princess Anne, Maryland, and we would call the police department in Salisbury, Maryland. During the summertime, it was easy because we live. Salisbury, Maryland is 20 minutes away from Ocean City. Once tourism season came, it was like fishing in a barrel, because when tourists comes, you know, they break crimes. So it was very, very easy for us, and that's why there was that reliance on the local PD, because they would send us story after story after story after story after story. And if anybody likes anything, they like their job to be easier. And that's what the local PD does for smaller stations. They just feed them stories. And when you have these inexperienced news reporters that really don't have their chops, they don't know how to chase stories, they don't know how to follow up with leads and everything, they're looking at this as a gift. They're like, oh, okay, this is how news is. And then they take that mindset and they go to the next station and they build that close relationship with the local PD, because that's what they were taught at their starter station. And then they move that on to the next station that they go to, until they get to, you know, your Philadelphias, your Houstons, your Los Angeleses, and your New Yorks of the world. And now, as a news reporter, I brainwashed myself into thinking that I need the police to tell this story, which then in turn has me have this heavy reliance on the police to make my story happen. So again, there's this uncomfortable partnership between local news and the police department, which is why one of the reasons why we created the TCP network. That is all. Any questions?
Marquis, we'll come back to you for questions if that's all right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. One of the things that I love about what's happening here is that we've got what we're showing, and your presentation in particular, that these multiple social institutions of our society are all embedded with the same system of systemic racism. So I tell my students all the time, yeah, we're critiquing the criminal justice system, but we got to critique the church too. We got to critique organized religion, or the media, or the healthcare system, where all of the social institutions are embedded with the same DNA that goes back 400 years. So you just illustrated that so well, building on what Kevin said. So hadn't even planned that, but it was a wonderful illustration for my students to see that no matter the social institution, it's got the same genetic material embedded within it. And Ellis, you come to us with an educational background and experience speaking to the same thing. And we know that it's also embedded in education. And so whether you're speaking to that or not doesn't matter to me, but I want to welcome Ellis Bonds, a colleague of mine here at Elizabethtown College, a native of Atlantic City, New Jersey, where he was born and raised. He received his Bachelor of Arts in Liberal Arts, concentration Social Sciences, minor in Africana Studies from Stockton University, Master of Science in Higher Ed from Florida International University. He went on to work at the University of New Hampshire as a hall director, then Rowan University as an area coordinator, currently serves as the Associate Director for Intercultural Affairs at Elizabethtown College. He is active in the NAACP, his fraternity, Lambda Sigma Upsilon Latino Fraternity, Incorporated, in which has found his passion for activism, racial equality, and human rights. Ellis, I'm delighted to have you here at the college with us and to have you on this program this morning. So go ahead. I think, yeah, there you go.
Oh, thank you. I don't really have like much to add because it was a lot said and a lot of things that I was going to point to already mentioned. So I don't want to duplicate the efforts. Kevin, you did talk about the die-in demonstration that you did in Lancaster, and I remember doing one of those when I was the president of the NAACP at my undergrad institution. We did it in conjunction with our BSU, and the campus police could never be on time for anything. A lockout, something's happening, whatever the case may be, they're taking their sweet old time to get there. We didn't even advertise the die-in demonstration. We were just going to go and just do it. And somehow, some way, it got leaked to the campus police, and the whole police force was there, including the canine dog. And so we had talked with them about that and let them know, like, this is part of the issue. Like, we're doing something peaceful, and we're doing, back then at that time, defund the police wasn't like a thing. It wasn't something that was like talked about widely. But this is something that is so simple and so peaceful, and just to give way to what happened, and you all have an issue with it, and you're coming here with your whole police force. But if if someone's fighting in the basketball court, or if someone's getting locked out at 2:00 in the morning, it takes you 25 minutes to get there when nothing else is going on. So I think that, when it comes to education, I guess that's pretty much where I think my brain goes. You talked about the salaries of what the officers make. And I remember sitting in classes and students would introduce themselves and say who they are, and say, their major was criminal justice. Professor would ask back, what do you want to do with that? And they would say, oh, I want to become a police officer. And the professor would say, then why are you in college? You don't need a degree to do this. And so I think that's part of the problem, is that when we talk about programs like the Boys and Girls Club, Police Athletic League, and all of those types of things that are community outreach programs to keep our kids, our youth, sorry, I shouldn't say kids, keep our youth off the streets and in those types of programs that are going to benefit them and things of that nature. A lot of times with those programs, education is a big piece of that, and what they're learning in their school and things like that, but then also what they're doing extracurricular, because a lot of times it's a proven fact, especially in a college environment, you learn more outside of the classroom than you do in the classroom. And so I think that that's a part of the issue, is that someone who makes that much money, I have 2 degrees and I don't make that much money with some of those lieutenants and some of those sergeants are making. And I also have experience that comes along with my degrees as well. You know what I'm saying? So I think that's an interesting point to point out, is that not saying that you need to have a doctorate degree in criminal justice to be a police officer, but some sort of education to help you learn some of those tactics, because clearly it is not being taught in the police academy for things like de-escalation and all of that kind of stuff. And if it is being taught, it's not being exercised properly when it comes to those types of instances. And I think that for me, it's always one of those things where it always jumps to mental health. And for me, mental health is very important. We need to talk about it. We need to be about it. We need to allocate resources for it. And, I think it's totally fine. I think it's great. And also, to your point, Kevin, and Marquis as well, let's make sure we're talking about the right narrative. Because Breonna Taylor sleeping in her bed in her own house was not a mental health concern, and she got murdered. So that's so that is a real fact. That's not something that, there are times where things have happened. I'm drawing a blank on the man's name, and I feel so bad saying that. But I know in Philadelphia, something similar happened to what happened in Lancaster.
Wallace, Mr. Wallace, can't remember.
Yes, thank you. And that happened, and mental health, and the way he was murdered, and the de-escalation things were not practiced, and all of that kind of stuff. And to your point, yes, you can send a social worker into a situation like that with just a clipboard and maybe a cell phone to call for backup if needed. And they will come out having de-escalated the situation, having calmed the person down, but you send the police there and then someone is dead. And like, that's a problem. So again, I don't want to duplicate efforts, but I do think that it's interesting that we point out the educational piece of our police officers and those who are in law enforcement, that it's not required, it's not required at all. They're required to go to an academy, as the video pointed out, to be physically fit. And then like, that's it, and pass a civil service test. I think that's how it is in New Jersey, at least. I don't know if that's like everywhere, but I know from New Jersey, that's what we have. That was something that we have to do. And again, thank you, Jen. That was my next point, is that my background is in housing and higher education. So I've done a lot of work in community living, residential learning, all of that kind of stuff. And I've supervised RAs, I've supervised grad students. And the RAs that I've supervised have better de-escalation training than police officers. That's a problem. And they're only doing that, they're only doing training for maybe 3 weeks, 2 or 3 weeks out of a summertime. And they're trained to de-escalate situations and things like that better than some officers that I've seen work in a higher education. Obviously here at E-Town, we have a security force and not a police, not a police force for the college. So it's different, but still some of the same things are being implemented. And I don't ever want us to be in a place where we think that because we're in the stratosphere of higher education, that we think that like this can't happen to us in this purview of being at this college. It's not something. I can give you a real quick example. Not at the college, but I live in Elizabethtown, and I don't have a car, so I walk back and forth to work. And so I was walking home Tuesday. I saw a white teacher come out of the high school. He's walking across the street. He notices me. He stares at me. He takes out his phone and then like puts his head down and keeps on walking. And then 2 minutes later, I hear cop sirens. So immediately I'm thinking that this white man just called the police on me because I'm Black walking through E-Town. So I pull out, try to find my ID card really quickly. Luckily, nothing happened. But the first thing I reached for was my college ID so that they know that I'm just here walking home, the same home that I pay for, like everyone else pays for in this community. But yeah, it was a very, very like panic moment of like, is this like it? Like, is something going to happen to me? Because I was simply walking home from work. So again, I want to make sure we have time for questions and all of that kind of stuff. But yes, what you both said was absolutely amazing.
Just real quick, Ellis, I want to point out something that you may all not know, but Elizabethtown was a sundown town.
Yes.
Which means that structurally, right, like Black people literally weren't allowed there after the sun went down. So your feelings, whether or not they actually were directly connected to that history or not, but you knew that. Right?
Oh,
so
yes.
you feel that. So you feel that. And that's an important part of that historical context.
I want to thank all three panelists, and let's give them a hand just now to appreciate what they've done. Terrific, just terrific. I want to open it up now for any of you to ask any questions that you have. Feel free just to call them out. Jen, go ahead. Did you have your hand up, Jen? No, you were clapping. All right. Let's go ahead. Any questions or comments, feedback you'd like to give this morning?
If nobody has any, I have a question for Mr. Ressler.
Jump in, Marquis.
All right. Can you talk about the time when you were running for mayor, and how your race and the relationship with the police played a part in your messaging and your preparation for your run? Yeah,
that's so. For those of you who don't know, I ran for mayor of Lancaster City in the Democratic primary, which is the only part that matters in the city, against this mayor, the current mayor, and policing was a large part of my platform. And one of the things that I talked about a lot was this residency issue. But the other is the ways in which police relate to community. So, if you look at certain communities, you'll see police officers are more likely to be out on their feet and talking to community members. And that is not the case here. I actually protested against a police athletic league coming down to the southeast part of the city, which is the highest economic challenge part of the city, because those are often really traumatic So what happens when you are at home and you see this officer come in and roughhouse your parent because someone called them around a housing issue, and then the next day they're supposed to be your coach? What does that actually do with how it frames how we think and do relationships? It's not authentic building. I also actually argued that I have argued that police athletic leagues should be police artistic leagues. If you're going to do something, it should be creative and should be, what happens if you write poetry together, if you act in a scene together and relate to one another, because the relationships are what's lost so much. The other thing I'll say, Marquise, particularly about that mayoral run, was I had a decent relationship with the then police chief, the captain, who is the recently dismissed police chief, and I had not good relationships around race. So when he was hired, I was not surprised when he was eventually dismissed. But one of the things that I have known about policing is that it is a very difficult thing for, let's use the good apple, bad apple example that you used. It's a really difficult thing for good apples to report bad apples, because oftentimes when there is leadership, you can't report someone because your leader might feel the same way that person does, right? You're concerned about being vocal because if you need to call for backup, you don't know if they're going to show up, right? And so there needs to be better mechanisms. This is something we talked about a little bit. There needs to be better mechanisms of reporting that are anonymous for police officers to root out concerns within their own ranks, because reporting through that mechanism is not helpful. When your district attorney is Craig Stedman, you're not going to be seen sympathetically. When he's 15 for 15 on finding officer involved shootings, we're justified, including shooting a homeless man with a short knife who ran away, got tased twice in his back, is cornered. Gregory Baines in 2013, known to the police, shot multiple times in the stomach when he's cornered and no longer has a weapon, and is found justified because he originally had a weapon. Why did he even encounter the police? Because he was homeless and he was peeing behind a post at 7:30 in the morning. And they came and harassed him and they threatened him, and he pulled out a knife he had and ran past them. They tased him. He continued to run. They cornered him at Yorgos and they shot and killed him. It's the same thing with Munoz, right? Why are we sending an individual officer, one person? Why are we even doing that? It makes no sense. And so when we talk about this stuff from a policy perspective, Marquise, which is the important thing, all of you who have ever done any protesting or will do any protesting, here's Kevin's favorite phrase I've come up with about protesting. Protest until policy. Do not protest until promise, because they will promise you and promise you and promise you till you go away. And that's what we keep seeing with the police from 2013 with Gregory Bain through Ricardo Munoz to today. We haven't demanded policy changes, and so they can keep rolling back. When Sean Williams in 2018 was tased in the streets, an international incident, it was caught on camera. The response was to have body cams for police. The incident was caught on camera. It wasn't that it wasn't seen, but the community was given body cameras as a promise, and they backed down on demanding actual change for what was wrong with the incident, which was the practices and policies of policing.
And Kevin, to that point, if I could piggyback off of that, that's why it's uncomfortable to have this marriage between the police and the media, because much like that narrative, and then what we're seeing now with the narrative with the narrative of defund the police, we see that messaging of what actually defund the police means is getting lost in the words, in the wording of, well, they're trying to defund the police, they're trying to get rid of the police, and that's the issue when the police control the narrative.
Which is why I'd primarily say refund the community. I saw JP was trying to say something.
Yeah, Jonathan, go ahead. And Jonathan, thank you for your running list of things that are helpful to us, the resources.
That's my pleasure. This is just awesome. Having long ago and far away conducted background investigations and training for a police department somewhere in the city of Boston, I wanted to ask not only our great presenters, but the student body as a whole, what can we do to not only better recruit people that reflect our community, and what requirements should we have of them to qualify for the job? That's all I got. Please.
I would definitely start by saying that as someone who grew up in Atlantic City, New Jersey, because of the neighborhood I grew up in, the goal was always to leave. It was never to come back and do anything. Like now I have a different perspective about it because I'm older and I've gone through education and like have more reflection and things of that nature.
Right.
But I think that when our communities when they're put as something that is like, no, like you grew up in this community, you come from this community. And then again, it's like the idea of W.E.B. Du Bois, the time to 10th, when you get up to that 10th percent, it's your duty now to go back into that community and do something about whatever is going on. And I think sometimes that piece of going back is missed, which is why, to Kevin's point about the adjacent locations and things like that, and being able to still be an officer in said community. I know that I forgot I think it was recently, maybe in the last like year and a half, 2 years, Camden, New Jersey, they let go their whole police department at one point in time,
Right.
and hired people back in the community, like from the community to police the community, because Camden, New Jersey is noted as one of the most dangerous cities in the United States. I think the most dangerous at one point in time. And so again, it's very challenging when you have people from Pennsauken or Cherry Hill or Ewing, New Jersey, or something like that, which are some of the more affluent areas, coming in and policing a city like Camden, which is full of Black and brown folks, all of that kind of stuff. So I think that growing up and like with the way we frame our community involvement needs to be something that makes our community makes it worthwhile for us to come back into. And like I said, now I'm older, so I have a different perspective. But as a child, I was always taught like, no, like get out the hood. That was literally what the narrative was.
Ellis, could I be selfish and ask that you stick around here because we need folk like you? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Ellis.
And I want to just add back on that video, the marketing video I showed, right? This is the point, right? To what you're saying, Ellis. So what kind of a person wants to go be a police officer in a community that everybody wants to leave and is told is very dangerous? When I lived in San Francisco, I worked in Oakland, California, and they were recruiting for police. And the only thing you ever saw on the recruitment was the salary. Nothing else. It was just the salary. You come here to make a good salary. But if you're going there and your motivation is the salary, then but your perception is that this is a dangerous community, how fast do you reach for the gun?
And Kevin, did you notice in the salary list you posted that some of the officers were making more than some of the supervisors? And that's all about overtime.
Overtime, right. And that salary, I didn't show you the rest of the department. The mayor makes $88,000 a year. The chief of staff makes 97. The bureau had the fire chief makes 122. So you've got 5 people in the police department making more money than anybody else in leadership within the city. What does that do for entitlement?
And you know what?
You got a mayor who's making 2/3 what you are, telling you what to do. You don't
exactly
value.
Kevin, you know how you get more overtime? You make more arrests.
Right. Because you got to.
I have a question for Kevin and Marquis and Ellis. So 3 years ago, we began our criminal justice program intentionally focused on reform, and that was before this past year. That's why we're doing events like this. But beyond that, I would love your counsel for how we embed within our program the kinds of concerns that you're addressing, because our goal is to graduate students with these sensitivities, concerns, exposure, awareness that we're looking at today, but who are going out into a system that is still going to try to re-socialize them back into what has been. And so how do we do this in a way that helps them to retain the sensitivities, commitments, passion, advocacy that I'm seeing in them? I'm seeing it more. In fact, I'm seeing it more this semester than I've ever seen it since. And I think the pandemic and the injustices that are exposed to the last year, I think the insurrection has touched sensitivities in this cohort that other cohorts before them haven't experienced in quite the same way. So I'm delighted by that. But how do we sustain this in them? Any thoughts?
Oh, yes, I have thoughts immediately. Absolutely.
Go ahead, Ellis.
One, I would say, and I know you've mentioned it several times, Conrad, that you talk about systemic racism in your classes. And so I don't know every person who teaches in a program. Obviously, I'm still learning E-Town. I'm new. I just started here in August. But I think that needs to be something that is discussed in all classes. I think a lot of times when we talk about policing or criminal justice system, or really typically any system in our country, we're ignoring what has happened in the past. We're ignoring what's happened in the past, and we're forgetting the correlation or ignoring the correlation that it has with present day events. So for an example, I was talking on Facebook about one of my good friends from college. She's in a doctorate program for education. And it was the day of January 6th, which was the insurrection at the Capitol and all of that. I won't say fun stuff, but all of that stuff. And all I said on Facebook was, I just hope that when the story is told, it's told correctly. Because again, to the other points I mentioned about media controls so much of like what happens. And so when you get those history books, because I think the issue is, to your point, is that when I was growing up, I remember a quick story. I was in high school, sophomore year in high school. I had US History 1, and Black History Month came, and my teacher had one lesson about Martin Luther King for 28 days. And I took issue with that. So I didn't do none of his work for the whole marking period because I wanted to protest him not talking about me and my Black self or my Blackness in the class. Now I got a D in the class. My dad wasn't happy about that, so I had to get that together so I wouldn't get in trouble. But the point was that we're not teaching this stuff to kids in school, and we're trying to glamorize history. And history is not always pretty. History is ugly at some points, and we have to own that as a country. The foundation of our country is not pretty; it's ugly. And so I think that going out into the field of being in any field, but specifically criminal justice, people who are going out into that field need to know what their sphere of influence is. Where does it begin and where does it end? And so how can that sphere of influence like impact change? And how can you become an agent of change through your sphere of influence? So that's what I will always say, is that they need to understand what influence they have. They're gonna have to go through the academies and all of that kind of stuff, because that's a part of the requirement to do it. But then like once you get in it, like for me, I was critiquing higher education as a sophomore in college, critiquing it, talking about it, everything. So I still critique it now, and I work in the field. But it's like now I know that I'm in the field, I'm able to become an agent of change within the field that I work in. And like, how do I do that effectively? So that's what I would say would be my first thought.
Yeah,
well, thank you.
I can
go ahead, Kevin.
Say I am in a continuous dialectic with 18, 19-year-old Kevin. There was a purity, an untainted idealistic purity of me. Now, maybe not everybody at their youth was in that space, but there was an idealistic purity of me that I am constantly checking myself against. Would 18-year-old Kevin be impressed or disappointed in me right now? Because as you get older, you are in a continual space of compromise. I have no choice. This is the rule. You may not be allowed to use some of the de-escalation trainings that you've been already practicing because your institution may say no. And so you say, okay, can I be here? Yes, no. If I can't, do I change the system? If I change it, can I be here? Yes, no. If the answer continues to be no, you go somewhere else. And you have to be willing to sacrifice sometimes comfort and wealth and other of those things in order to be okay with yourself. And when we talk about issues like self-care, oftentimes the reason you're providing yourself self-care is because the institutions and structures that you are wrapped in are destroying 18-year-old you. And so continuously remember who you are in this moment today as the world tries to negatively change that as you move forward.
Thank you, Kevin. That's a powerful image. Marquise.
Mine is a little dark. But I honestly, I don't think that anything can change. I think that when you look at the origin of police in this country, when you look at this country and how we embrace violence, and how we embrace being aggressive, and then when you look at certain cultures within the American culture, and how some of those cultures are just entrenched in destruction, entrenched in oppression, and then you have people of said cultures go into agencies like policing, like law enforcement, unless there's a way that we can change hearts and minds and measure hearts and minds during a training process. I don't think that there's really anything that we can do besides train people to hold others accountable. I don't think that we can again change a mind because in news we have this same kind of, not to the same degree, but it's the same kind of thing. Like, are you here for news, or are you here to become a celebrity? You know, and like going through training, going through classes when you're at your starter station, nobody really can tell. I mean, you can tell the outliers who wants to be celebrities and everything like that, but you really can't tell at that point in time. Same thing with that rookie. That rookie that comes, he may not, or she may not have that intention to become this overly aggressive officer, to look at people of color a certain way, but just over time, and those hidden biases that has been there all through life. You know, you put a gun and a badge in a person that felt powerless their whole life, what's going to happen? You know, so I don't want to, you know, be the downer here, but I really believe that that to change a heart and mind, that's extremely difficult. And if it could be done, it could have been done already. And that what I'm really getting at, what we need to focus on is the cultural change of police departments. Because even if you have one good apple, two good apples, they're still up against this structure that wants to keep things the same and keep them the same. I'll just keep it like that.
Thank you. I'm going to have to jump in because some of us have a class, including me, at 11 o'clock, and it feels like we're just getting started. So I think it reminds us, Alice, that you and Nicole and I need to keep this going, because there's a great thing here going. So we'll talk about potentially another panel down the road and maybe have some of you back. I just can't say enough thanks to all of you who participated this morning, our three panelists. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your energy, for your passion, and for your commitment to these just incredibly important, as we know, significant issues for all of our communities. God bless you all. Thank you. Take care.
Yeah.